what lessons do you think can be learned from that event?
A lot of them, and I think we have learned a lot of them. I think the climate movement of today is not the Copenhagen climate movement, and that's a very good thing. I always remember, arriving in the city and that ad campaign. And those of you who were there, I'm sure, remember those images of Obama and Merkel and other leaders, and they had been photoshopped to age them, And so it was like, Obama with gray hair and so on, and more lines on his face. And it was like, President Obama, what will you tell your grandchildren, right? And so it was really a posture of, first of all, highly personalized on the leaders, and our posture, the movement's posture in this campaign was really as a supplicant to these leaders, begging them, appealing to their conscience and so on. But we were powerless in that equation, and then heartbroken. A great many people, particularly many young people who were, this was their first engagement with political action, were extraordinarily heartbroken by the Copenhagen experience. So I think that the most important thing we can learn from that is that we start from the premise that we have no leaders, certainly not inside the summit. That these are our climate failures, traitors. I mean, they most certainly are not leaders, right? There are leaders, but they're outside, and they're in the frontline communities that are already in the midst of a just transition and building the next economy. And those are the voices that need to be lifted up and celebrated, and the experiences that we need to learn from. So I think that we go in with our eyes wide open. We know there is no science-based deal that can emerge from this negotiation. We have to go in understanding that. I mean, there's no possible way that between now and December, our governments are going to get to the point where they are going to announce a plan to cut emissions by 8 to 10% a year, which is what they need to do if we're going to keep the promises they made in Copenhagen. So let's just be honest about that and serious about that, and not pretend that there's any possibility that it will happen. But that doesn't mean that Copenhagen, that Paris isn't important for our movement. I think it is important as a galvanizing moment where our movements can come together and articulate what we mean by climate action. Because I think the other problem with Copenhagen and also with the New York March was this sort of very generic call for action, right? And certainly what we know about the Paris COP, and what I've heard European friends refer to it as the nuclear COP. There are going to be all kinds of very bad ideas posing as climate solutions. So I think the real imperative is to be in a position by the time the summit happens where we can articulate what a justice-based transition away from fossil fuels means. So, the slogan, system change, not climate change, which was certainly there in Copenhagen, not everybody was in that supplicant position. There was a more radical flank that, most of you were a part of if you were there. It still was pretty general, right? I mean, it was not an articulated plan. And I think that, I don't think that every last detail needs to be figured out, but I think some pretty broad stroke demands can be made ahead of Paris if we have the right kind of, if we create the right kind of spaces in the lead up for those to be democratically determined. In Canada, we're working towards that, doing a lot of work bringing together First Nations and the labor movement that right now is just reeling from layoffs in the tar sands, because the tar sands are in huge trouble because the price of oil is so high. And we're trying to get to a point where we can have a sort of at least kind of 5 points of agreement, right, of what we're working towards. 100% decentralized, renewable, maybe free, affordable, entirely free public transit might be a demand. A principle that front lines are first in line for to benefit from the transition. So First Nations communities would be the first communities to benefit from a transition to renewable energy. Workers losing their jobs in the tar sands would be retrained for this new economy. These types of principles. Also, that the whole thing has to be paid for within a polluter pays framework. So this is not just about passing any old carbon tax that passes the costs on to consumers, the same rates across the board. So low-income people are just dealing with more costs. So I think that's just an example of some of the discussions that are happening in Canada, which is a country this transition is kind of being foisted upon us right now. The government of Alberta just lost 17% of its budget in one blow because of what's happening with the price of oil. So I think this is a real window, and that's makes it, I think, completely different from Copenhagen. If we think about what our goals are, it's not really looking to the leaders; it's looking to one another and articulating what transformation means.